The moment those blue lights flash in your rearview mirror, something shifts inside you. Your grip tightens on the steering wheel, your eyes flick between the road and the mirror, and your brain starts racing through a checklist you didn't even realize you had. Was I speeding? Did I miss a sign? Is my registration up to date? And then comes the slow pullover, the quiet hum of your engine idling, and that heavy silence before the officer even steps out of their vehicle. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where the officer's behavior made you uncomfortable, confused, or even embarrassed you in front of others? If you have, I want you to share that experience in the comments, because what I'm about to break down goes deeper than most people realize, and there's a moment later in this discussion that might completely change how you handle your next encounter. Let's get into this. There's this common belief that traffic stops are straightforward. You get pulled over, the officer asks for your license and registration, maybe gives you a warning or a ticket, and that's the end of it. Clean, simple, routine. But in reality, traffic stops are one of the most unpredictable and psychologically loaded interactions between civilians and law enforcement. And sometimes, things go sideways. Not just awkward, legally dangerous. I'm going to walk you through a situation that mirrors real-world cases I've studied and analyzed, where a female officer, confident, assertive, and convinced she was in control, ended up crossing lines that didn't just affect one driver, but ultimately brought legal consequences that embarrassed her entire department. Picture this. You're driving home late at night, not doing anything wrong. Speed is fine, headlights on, everything normal. Then suddenly, lights. You pull over. The officer approaches slowly, one hand near her belt, the other holding a flashlight that cuts through your window like a spotlight. She doesn't greet you right away. Instead, she scans the interior of your car. That's the first thing most people don't realize. Before a word is spoken, you're already being evaluated. Where are you coming from tonight? It sounds casual, but it's not. That question is strategic. It's not about your destination. It's about your response, your tone, your hesitation, whether your answer matches your behavior. And this is where drivers start making mistakes without realizing it. A lot of people think being overly friendly helps, so they talk, and talk, and talk. Just coming from a friend's house, we were watching a game, nothing crazy, had a couple drinks, but I'm fine. Stop right there. You just handed the officer a reason to escalate. Now, in the case I'm thinking of, the driver did something different. He stayed calm, polite, but minimal. I'm not answering questions, officer. That's it. No attitude, no hostility, just a clear boundary. And this is where the tone of the stop shifted instantly. You see, officers are trained to maintain control of the interaction. When someone doesn't engage the way they expect, it creates tension. Not necessarily because the driver is wrong, but because it disrupts the flow they rely on. The officer in this situation didn't like that response, not one bit. Why not? If you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. You've probably heard that line before. It's one of the most common psychological nudges used during traffic stops. And here's the truth most people don't hear enough. You are not legally required to answer investigatory questions during a routine traffic stop in the United States. You do have to provide identification, license, registration, and proof of insurance when required. But questions like where you're going, where you're coming from, what you're doing, they fall into a different category. Now here's where things escalated. Instead of respecting that boundary, the officer doubled down. Her tone sharpened, her posture changed. She stepped back, called something in over her radio, and suddenly what started as a basic stop began to stretch. Minutes passed, then more minutes. And here's something people underestimate. The longer an officer holds your documents without a clear purpose, the more legally questionable the stop becomes. Time matters. Courts have repeatedly examined how long a traffic stop can reasonably last. Once the initial purpose of the stop is addressed, say a speeding violation, anything beyond that requires additional justification. But many drivers don't know this, so they sit there, quiet, waiting, nervous. And nervous behavior, that gets noticed. Shaky hands, avoiding eye contact, fidgeting. These things don't prove wrongdoing, but they absolutely influence how an officer perceives the situation. Back to the scenario. The officer returned, still holding the driver's license. That's another key detail. If your documents are still in the officer's possession, you are not free to leave. Step out of the vehicle. Now we're entering a different phase. Legally, officers can order drivers out of the vehicle during a lawful traffic stop. That authority has been upheld by courts for officer safety reasons. But how that authority is used and what follows matters a lot. The driver complied, calmly, but the officer wasn't done. She began asking the same questions again. Same wording, slightly different tone. Where are you coming from tonight? This repetition isn't random. It's a tactic. Officers sometimes repeat questions to see if your answers change. Inconsistencies can create probable cause for further investigation. But the driver didn't change his response. I'm not answering questions. At this point, frustration was visible. And this is where things crossed into dangerous territory, not physically, but legally. The officer began implying that refusal to answer questions was suspicious, that it justified further detention, that it could lead to a search. That's not how it works. Refusing to answer questions by itself does not create probable cause. But in the moment, under pressure, a lot of drivers don't know that. They panic, they start talking, they try to explain, and that's often when situations spiral. Now here's where the real issue began. The officer initiated a search without proper legal justification. She claimed she smelled something, a vague statement, no specifics, no clear articulation. And here's the thing, courts look very closely at claims like that, especially when they appear after a driver has asserted their rights. The search turned up nothing, no contraband, no illegal items, nothing to justify the escalation. But the damage was already done. The driver had been detained longer than necessary, questioned repeatedly despite invoking his rights, removed from his vehicle without clear justification beyond routine procedure, and subjected to a search that didn't hold up legally. And here's where it gets serious. That driver filed a lawsuit, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because what happened crossed constitutional boundaries. And when cases like this go to court, everything gets examined. Body cam footage, timing, tone, language. Every second of that interaction becomes evidence. And that's where the embarrassment comes in. Because what may have felt like a routine stop in the moment can look very different when replayed in a courtroom. The officer's repeated questioning, the lack of clear justification for prolonging the stop, the weak basis for the search, it all starts to unravel under scrutiny. Departments don't like that, not because they don't want accountability, but because it reflects on training, supervision, and policy enforcement. Now, let me pause here for a second, because this is important. This isn't about attacking law enforcement. There are countless officers who handle traffic stops professionally, respectfully, and within the law every single day. But when an officer steps outside those boundaries, even slightly, it can create a chain reaction of legal consequences that affect not just them, but their entire department. And here's the part most drivers don't think about. You don't have to argue, raise your voice, or resist to protect your rights. In fact, doing those things often makes your situation worse. The driver in this case didn't yell, didn't insult, didn't escalate. He stayed calm, consistent, clear. That's powerful, because it removes the emotional element and leaves only the facts. And facts are what courts rely on. Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you. Tone matters more than words in many of these situations. You can say the exact same sentence 2 different ways and get completely different reactions. I'm not answering questions. Said calmly, that's a boundary. Said aggressively, that's perceived as defiance. Officers are human. They respond to tone, body language, and perceived attitude just like anyone else. That doesn't change your rights, but it absolutely influences how the interaction unfolds. Another thing people don't realize is how much officers rely on behavioral cues. They're watching your hands, your eyes, your breathing, the way you respond to simple instructions. Even silence communicates something. And that's why consistency is key. If you choose not to answer questions, stick to that. Don't go halfway. Don't answer some and refuse others. That inconsistency can create confusion and suspicion. Now let's go back to the lawsuit for a moment. Cases like this often hinge on very specific legal questions. Was the stop prolonged beyond its original purpose? Was there reasonable suspicion to justify further detention? Was probable cause established for a search? If the answer to those questions leans toward no, the case becomes very strong. And when departments lose cases like that, it's not just about money. It's about policy changes, internal reviews, sometimes even disciplinary action. That's where the embarrassment comes in, because now it's not just one officer's decision, it's a reflection of the entire department's practices. And all of this started with something as simple as a traffic stop. Now let me bring this back to you, because this is where it really matters. Most people don't expect a routine stop to turn into something complicated. They assume cooperation equals safety, and in many cases, cooperation does help. But blind cooperation, without understanding your rights, can lead you into situations you didn't anticipate. You don't need to be confrontational. You don't need to win the interaction. You just need to be aware. Know what you're required to provide. Know what you can decline. Know how to stay calm under pressure. And maybe most importantly, know that the way you handle those few minutes on the side of the road can have consequences far beyond that moment. Because sometimes the difference between a routine stop and a legal case isn't what the officer does first. It's how the situation evolves after that initial question. And that's the part most people never see coming.